Hey everyone. So, Rick Beato's talked a lot lately about which legacy artists are going to have staying power. Who are the people that maybe put out their first album 30, 40, 50 years ago that people today, the young people, are still going to listen to? And that got me thinking about some of the criteria he used. He talked a lot about record labels and people who manage catalogs being unfriendly to the modern world, unfriendly to people doing reaction videos, unfriendly to his own education based videos. In other words, censorship of music because of, let's say, strict interpretations of fair use. And there are other factors too that we can put on the commercial rather than the artistic side. Are people still going around doing interviews? Are they still doing ads? Are they still doing PR? Are they just sort of keeping the music living and in the scene by getting people to talk about it either organically or because they're spending money to do so? But what about the actual qualities of a particular artist that would make him or her or a band actually have this kind of staying power? So let's look at what I call the lifespan of a band and how long that lasts. And I'm not talking about when a band or an artist begins, when they retire, when a band breaks up. I'm talking about how popular something is beyond the lifespan of a band. Take Led Zeppelin, for instance. Their final album, which was only a sort of a half-baked album because Bonzo was dead. This was Coda in 1980, and Zeppelin were gone. But they continued to be popular among young generations in the 80s, in the 90s, and even though the 2000s aren't really much of a rock decade, their popularity was there. But today, not so much. The young Gen Zers, let's call them, well, that's what they're called. They're not so much into Led Zeppelin. Queen, on the other hand, as Rick pointed out, is still extremely popular among people who weren't even alive when Freddie Mercury was still alive. Now, that's significant staying power, and the numbers he talked about on Spotify really bear that out. So today I wanted to take a look at what artistic qualities give someone staying power, either for a long career or something that lasts past the final album that someone makes. And I want to take a look at who I think is probably the most influential artist to come out in the 21st century, and that's Ye, formerly known as Kanye West. Now, what gives him staying power? Well, some people might point to his big personality. Some people might point to the fact that he always gets press coverage, positive or negative coverage, nevertheless. But what about the artistic qualities of his music? Now, Ye, as a producer, changed the way hip hop sounded. The sounds of the 90s, which were themselves very revolutionary, were really driven by the G Funk revolution. This was people like Dr. Dre as a producer, Warren G, who was obviously part of his family, metaphorically and literally. There was DJ Quick, Sir Jinx, so many great ones that I'm leaving out. But they were sort of the ones that anchored that G Funk West Coast sound, which borrowed heavily from bands like Parliament, things like Roy Ayers' Ubiquity, all of that wonderful sort of mid 70s to mid 80s funk, and which were great pieces of music in and of themselves. And they were given a second life by these artists. Some of the songs were more obscure. I Want to Do Something Freaky to You became Nothing But a G Thing. And that obviously had much more chart success, resurrected a great song that a lot of people had forgotten about because it didn't have that kind of staying power. And we can ask ourselves why. By the early 2000s, hip hop was looking for a new direction, mostly sonically, but also lyrically. And that's where Kanye, as he was known then, enters the picture. He did something that I call a cinematic style of music. And that style of music is pervasive in every genre imaginable, just about. And we'll get to that in a bit. Now, what do I mean by cinematic music? I don't mean music that necessarily is story music with a beginning, middle, and end. If that were the case, then we would see folk music having the same enduring quality of people like Queen, people like Ye, people like Richard Wagner in the classical world. But most 19, 20-year-olds today aren't playing John Prine or Bob Dylan on their TikTok videos. And we'll get to why in a bit. So, by cinematic music, I mean music that makes you feel like you're watching a thrilling, dramatic movie or a play or even a video game, something that has that essential element of drama where the music is about more than just the virtuosity, more than just how cool or how fun or how emotive the sound is. It's something that's really a whole package that makes you feel, whether you're listening at work on your headphones, whether you're at home in front of the stereo, driving in your car, it makes you feel like you've just been through an experience that's a bit more ethereal than just sitting in a club or a concert hall listening to the music. Ye's production really infused that cinematic value into the music because he strayed away from sampling just one or two songs, looping them, and then having really fun, really cool lyrics over them, which was the 90s model of rap. And with less sophisticated sampling, that was also the 80s model of rap. He did something that was a patchwork of highly organized sounds. Even when it sounded chaotic, you could tell that the attention to detail was there. And the result was a feeling that gives you this beginning, middle, and end feeling, even if the lyrics don't necessarily tell a story. Ye isn't really a story rapper per se. Ice-T, probably the best storyteller in the hip hop world. But even though he remains popular as a cultural legend, his music hasn't, among the 19, 20-year-olds, etc., had that kind of staying power. There are people today that were born after Ye's first album was released way back in the early 2000s, and they've got him all over their Spotify and Apple playlists and everything else because he's got that cinematic quality and he's not afraid to vary it. Some of the album covers that you see behind me are testament to that fact. So let's now go back and look at some of the legacy artists, some of whom are dead, some of whom are retired, that have that cinematic quality that young people still listen to. Queen, absolutely that cinematic quality. When you're listening to Bohemian Rhapsody, Radio Gaga, We Are the Champions, it doesn't feel that you're just grooving along with a really cool record or listening intently to something that's really musically intricate or even necessarily that's something that just wows you immediately with the originality. Queen's basic template was taking some of the sonic textures of the glam rock movement that came out just before them, combining that with the kind of attitude of prog rock, but without some of the extreme intricacies. But what really made them stand out was that it just feels like an experience. And one of the other interesting things about this cinematic style of music is that it can become part of an experience without overwhelming the experience, but also without being pushed into the background. I'll give you some examples of that. When you're at a football game, you're probably going to hear We Will Rock You and We Are the Champions. Now, it's not background music because it involves the audience. It's designed to pump you up, it's designed to get you going. And it does. But at the same time, if you're hearing We Will Rock You while the team is running onto the field, you have the psychological ability to pay attention both to the people running onto the field and to the song. That is what's unique about cinematic music. It's not background music that underscores some other event, but nor is it something that's so overwhelming that you're not able to pay attention to anything else. See, for instance, why you don't see a great guitar solo by Robin Trower or Jimi Hendrix or even Eddie Van Halen when the team runs onto the field. Because how are you going to pay attention to Patrick Mahomes and Eddie Van Halen at the same time? But you can do it with Queen. You can do it with Kanye, with Ye. This style of music, it also applies to popularity trends and listening trends in classical music, which is obviously much less popular than hip hop or rock, but it's still pervasive in many corners. And for that, we have to turn to Richard Wagner. Now, Wagner's music was cinematic in the sense that even though it predated cinema, they told stories. It was done in the opera format. Almost all of his great compositions were done for the opera house. But more important than that, why is he more popular and why is he more memorable, even for people that might not even know his name necessarily, than other composers, operatic, symphonic, or otherwise, of his day? It's because he had that same cinematic quality. The music was an event. It can't help but being an event. Same with Queen, same with Ye, same with Pink Floyd. Another band from the 70s who, like Queen, still tend to permeate the consciousness of young people, of Gen Zers, more than some of the other great bands of the 70s. Take ELP, Led Zeppelin, wonderful bands of that era, not really as well known among your 19, 20-year-olds. Everyone knows some of the great motifs and great melodies of Wagner. A testament to that, just like Queen and Ye have music used at sporting events, you have bits of Wagner that have been used in film, in other drama, in television shows. Apocalypse Now excerpted the Hayoto section from Die Valkyrie, a famous opera within the Wagnerian ring cycle. Everyone's heard it. Everyone can relate to it, whether or not they know the biography of Wagner or his history. And the same is true with Queen. There might be, and this might be shocking to some, there might be some 17-year-old out there who knows every word to Bohemian Rhapsody, but might not even really yet know what Freddie Mercury looked like if this kid hadn't taken the time to look into it. That is the power of music, that has this ability to have this longevity across generations, across musical styles, and across musical trends. So Ye has obviously dominated the first 20 years or so of the 21st century. So the question is, in another 20 years, will people like Rick Beato be saying, look, the kids are still on Spotify or whatever service we have then, they're still giving huge listening numbers to Ye's music? And I'm going to say absolutely yes. He's got that staying power, that relatable power, where even if you don't know his history in the music business, even if you don't know the technicalities of how he changed production and how his lyrics moved away from a lot of the traditional themes of 90s and very early 2000s hip hop to talk about themes that are more emotional, rather than more emotional in a sort of metaphysical sense, rather than in a more direct sense or in a more political sense, the way, again, like much of the great hip hop of the 90s was. He had that, all of those things contribute to that cinematic quality of Ye. That kind of music is going to have sticking power. Wagner has that sticking power, that staying power. Queen, Pink Floyd, Ye. They're absolutely going to have it. And that's what makes Ye a living legend, because we can see by analyzing the artistic qualities of the music that he's going to be around for a long time on the playlists of not only the next generation, but probably a couple generations, if not more, after that. Thanks again for listening. Like, subscribe, and all that crap. And we'll see you next time.